Welcome, everyone, to our Next Generation Assessment Web Bite series. I'm Tammie Cumming. I serve as the Associate Provost of Institutional Effectiveness at the City University of New York's Brooklyn College. And today we're going to be talking about the importance of the academic program self-studies. I'm joined by my co-host, David Miller.
Hi, I'm David Miller. I'm at the University of Florida, where I'm a professor in research and evaluation methods. I'm also the director of the School of Human Development and Organizational Studies and Education. And today we are pleased to have with us Professor Timothy Shortell, who is the Professor of Sociology at Brooklyn College. And for today's discussion, perhaps equally important, he is the Faculty Council Chair.
Hello. Nice to see all of you.
Well, thanks so much for joining us. It's especially exciting for me to have one of my colleagues on campus to be one of our guests on the series. And I know you're going through a self-study right now for all of the degree programs in your sociology department. And I thought I'd just start off with, how do you find this as an important process for your department and not just for accreditation purposes?
Yeah, it is. I would say it's very important, and largely because it's an opportunity to do more formally processes that we routinely engage in, and I suspect this is true of lots of different departments. It is certainly true of my department in sociology. We're constantly conversing with one another about our program. We have just one undergraduate degree program, although we also participate in some related programs. And you know, we have monthly meetings, we have an annual retreat, and where we engage in those reflexive practices. But we also do it kind of routinely when we talk to each other, informally in the hallway and in offices, and and get together. And there's a lot of this kind of reflective activity that's happening at Brooklyn College at the moment, particularly in the post-pandemic period, as we've all come back and tried to figure out what we're doing and how conditions have changed. But all of that activity tends to be really in the moment and linked to specific kinds of tasks. If we're having a curriculum discussion, it might be related to a curriculum proposal or something like that. And so we haven't built a process where we kind of routinely talk about these things in a holistic kind of way, especially in terms of long-term planning. And I suspect that it's probably true for most departments that the self-study is the occasion for long-term planning, right? And so we're not doing this kind of thing having not thought about it at all before. It's really a matter of kind of remembering and gathering together information that we've produced, over the process of 8 years at Brooklyn. The period of the self-study. We're just gathering things and kind of reviewing things and looking at things again that might have been subject to kind of smaller discussions, and trying to put them together in a bigger sort of way. And it's also an opportunity to have that conversation in the bigger institutional context, because most of the time when we're doing these reflective practices, we're talking to each other, or we're talking to colleagues in related departments. And this is a kind of built-in conversation that we have with the administration at the college, where we say, here's what we think we're doing well, here's what we think we're, where we could do better, but here's what we need, to be able to do that. And I think it's particularly important in challenging times to kind of have that opportunity. So as we've engaged in this process, we're kind of wrapping up. This is year 2 of our self-study preparation. We've kind of tried to formalize things that we've already been talking about, and in the case of sociology, we've done a lot of very new things in the last 5 years. Again, some of that is a reflection of the post-pandemic period, but not all of it. And So maybe more than was the case in the last couple of iterations of the self-study, we felt like we had a lot of new stuff to say based on that material. So yeah, I think in terms of our strategic planning, this is really the most important thing that we do.
Thanks, Tim. I know that this is not, your assessment, though, in general, is not episodic. You are systematic in assessing your students and having those conversations, which probably makes it a little easier to have the faculty on board. But I was going to follow up and say, do you have to run around and get faculty, to gear up on this? Or are they willing participants and say, you know what, I do realize the importance of this?
Yeah, I think it's generally the case that there's not much persuasion that's needed, in a department like mine where we're kind of routinely having these conversations about the program and about how what we think we're doing well and where we think we need to improve. But I do think that some of the characteristics of the moment that we find ourselves in are making it more challenging. And so, we did have to we did have some meetings as we were planning where we wanted to make sure that we were all kind of in the same place as we got started. And so one of the things that we talked about was making sure that everyone played a role. And we're a mid-sized department at Brooklyn College. But we're very involved in activities at the college. I'm leading faculty governance. We have people in the union. We have people in administrative office. We have people running programs, and so that's we're deeply involved in the academic life at the college. And so we kind of had to say, well, even though that's the case, this is something that's for us as a department and to support our program, and we all have that responsibility. And that when, if people opt out of it, it doesn't mean that there's less work. It just means the rest of us have to carry more. And so we kind of wanted to have that conversation where we were all understanding that. And I think that was particularly important, especially, given the challenges of the pandemic, because in a public institution, like CUNY, we're kind of in the midst of a budget crisis, and we have a heavier teaching load than our peers at other institutions, and there and because of the budget crisis, there's sort of a staff shortage. There's not as many people supporting academic work at the college, and so we all feel like we're stretched a little bit thin, and so that creates, I think, a level of frustration that we had to engage with. We had to recognize that that's a part of the process, and that we had to figure out a way to organize the work that we were doing that didn't feel like a burden. And it's because it's real work, right? I mean, it's a really substantive project, but because we recognized that we were doing things, that we were sort of pulling together things that we were routinely doing, it didn't feel like we were starting from zero. But it's over and over again in the conversations, questions would rise like, if we say we need this, are we going to be told no because we're not doing anything, right? The college is in a tight spot in terms of the budget, or enrollments are down, and so that and that isn't always the case, right? And I suspect that if we had gone into the self-study a year earlier or a year later, that's context might have been a little bit different. So we did kind of have to grapple with, is there a way to do this to really engage what we want to do, but also that kind of acknowledges that that this is a particularly challenging time for a whole bunch of different kinds of things. And we recognize that in our students when we talk about their work and learning goals. We kind of take that into account, but we don't always take that into account with each other. So we did want to, that was a part of the conversation that we organized at the beginning of the year in our retreat, to kind of say, we're all feeling a little bit stretched and tired and frustrated because resources are scarce, but we need to try to do this in a way that will make it useful to us, and that it's like all these reflective practices routinely do. It is an opportunity to kind of think strategically. So it's in other departments on campus. I suspect that it might be harder where there's less of that culture of kind of reflective practices. But I think the key is recognizing that that we engage in this kind of reflection routinely. So all we're doing is kind of making the process a little bit more formal and presenting it, pulling it together and presenting it in a way that's meaningful to people who weren't part of those other conversations, right? And I think there's a feeling in the department now that that the work was worth it, and that we saw that we have a draft of the report, and people are happy that that we emphasize the things that we had been spending so much time on. So not that it wasn't a hard sell in that sense. I think it was more having to do with kind of recognizing the specialness of the challenges that we're facing at the moment.
Thank you. It sounds like you've got a lot of people who are very involved in it. And it sounds like it really have a good way of keeping people involved in this, which is really a good thing. One of the things you've talked about is how you do it every 8 years. You've mentioned that there's a lot of I hear the word constantly of reporting, and often we see that kind of thing in this kind of activity. Is that what we end up doing is reporting back, and that becomes one of the primary things we're doing, is we're reporting all the great things we're doing, and I applaud you for that. I guess I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about after this is done, or maybe it's part of that process. How do we make sure that, or do you make sure that somehow that we are closing the loop, that we're using this information, that this is a worthwhile activity, not just for reporting to others, but in terms of where you're going to be next year and the year after?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I think that's always the risk. I mean, we in departments like mine, where we teach about assessment and program evaluation and so forth as part of our methodology, we use that phrase a lot, but we're not always kind of mindful of the way that we need to do that about our own practices. And in this case, we had a number of special projects that we had undertaken, where this was really the opportunity to kind of come together to say, we for example, we changed the way the department does advising. So when we started that, we had a goal. We thought we had recognized that we were not doing as well as we needed to be doing in terms of advising our majors and concentrators. And so we made a big change to the way that we do advising, and now every sociology major and every sociology concentrator in the sustainability and education programs we participate in gets an individual faculty advisor. So and that was a lot of work, and it was a lot of work to build. It was a lot of work to kind of sustain in that initial period, but we needed, and the timing was right. So we needed to kind of come together to say, all right, we did this big change. Has it achieved the goal? Is it getting us closer to the achieving the goal? And so in that regard, we took the material that we had been discussing and really did link it back. We went back and looked at the motivation that led us to this big change, and everybody had a chance to reflect on it, and that led to some modifications to the way that we were doing things. So that's an example. I would say the other big example for us is, and again, just partly due to fortunate timing, we needed to do a big kind of overhaul or overview of our curriculum. Last time that we did a major curriculum change was probably 10 or 15 years ago. And so we had been talking for a while about it's time to kind of reflect, is this the curriculum that we want for this, cohort of students? And so, again, we had been doing those things and having those conversations, and the self-study was an opportunity to be deliberate about pulling all that material together and looking at it together and having meetings, together where that's what we were talking about. And again, like with the advising program, it led us to, to ask ourselves some really specific questions that we might not have asked before. For example, the question that we're about to talk about at the February department meeting is whether we have a capstone seminar in the major, that's in the sociology major, and we're going to be discussing whether we need to take that capstone and basically create two different versions of it. A capstone that's oriented toward professional training in sociological research for students that we know aspire to graduate in professional schools, and then a version of the capstone which is more oriented around career competencies for students who are interested in graduating and entering the labor market. And the conversation of the last couple of years was about, is the one capstone doing everything that we need for both of those students? Because those student populations seem to be more distinctive than they were the last time we did this big curriculum discussion. And so that was a way in which pulling all that material together in the self-study led us to some really specific questions that were, and we've planned to have a conversation where we'll make a decision. And in this case, it could lead to, a specific, curriculum document that we'll put together as a result of. My guess is that that's kind of where we're heading. And I'm not sure that we could have achieved a consensus in the department had we not gone through that process. So I don't think it happens automatically. I think you have to be really deliberate about it. But at least for us in sociology, I think the timing was right with regard to some of the big projects that we were working on. And we were really deliberate about making sure that we took that information and reflected on, what decisions does that lead to that we need to make now.
That's very helpful. It's good to hear that you're using the data in that formative way, and it's good to hear examples like that. Thank you.
Yeah, as assessment reports under institutional effectiveness. So it's good to hear that the self-study is not just an exercise, but actually something that's useful, and that the faculty are buying into this and engaging. That's always really good to hear. But I did want to mention that at our institution, it is a peer review, as with most. So we have peer reviewers from outside of actually the whole entire university. So Brooklyn College is part of the system, the City University of New York, but the reviewers are from outside of the system, and they come in. And I think that that's really important, that the peer review process occurs so that you can get a fresh perspective from outside. Did you want to mention anything about that, Tim, or the guidelines of what you had to put into the self-study? It's pretty comprehensive, from a financial analysis with the senior vice president of financial affairs to, your enrollments, your seats, the courses. It's very involved.
Yeah, and of course, some of that information we engage with more routinely, and some of it that we don't, that we need to kind of reflect on together. But I think for us, and I suspect again that this is probably typical. It was an opportunity, because it wasn't just the department talking to each other or the department talking to the administration, which we do regularly. It was an opportunity to kind of think about the profession. And so the department has a departmental membership in our main professional organization, and in the the Eastern Region Professional Association. So it was an opportunity to go to those bodies and to to look at the material that they prepare on self-studies and kind of reflect on best practices so that we can kind of think about, and in particular, because the last major curriculum revision that we did relied heavily on the material from the American Sociological Association, because we were really deliberate about trying to build a pipeline because we're a minority serving institution, a pipeline to graduate school in sociology. And ASA had a lot of material on that. But so that we do that kind of occasionally, and we don't do it routinely. We don't like check the ASA materials every year. So for and it was some time ago when we did it last, when we made the curriculum changes, and so now it was helpful to kind of go back and see what the profession is saying, especially in light of the challenges that every institution of higher education is facing, in the post-pandemic period. So that I would say was the most important thing about recognizing that this was, both an internal and external process. It was an opportunity to check in again with our professional organizations, and honestly, that's partly where the idea of splitting the capstone into two came from, because there's some material from the ASA that talked about organizing a more organizing a capstone experience oriented for students who are interested in entering the labor market rather than going on to get additional professional training. So I would say that's kind of the main thing as well, but also as an opportunity to learn from other institutions, especially in the Northeast, right? We're all facing many of the same challenges, and so that kind of recognizing that conversation isn't just one way. It isn't just us, reporting to external evaluators, but it's also an opportunity, to get perspectives from outside the university as well.
Well, thank you so much. That I know this is really helpful for those, struggling with getting faculty on board to do a self-study or recognize its importance. And a lot of the institutions face challenges similar to the ones we face financially across the nation. So thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule as professor and chair of faculty council. We really appreciate you giving this advice to our colleagues out there who are watching.
My pleasure.
Yes, thank you.